The year was 1888. London stood at the height of the British Empire, wealth, power, and progress radiating from its grand avenues. But in the East End district of Whitechapel, life was a daily fight for survival. Overcrowded tenements spilled into narrow alleys, poverty clung to every doorstep, and thick smog turned gaslit streets into a permanent twilight. Crime was common, hope was scarce, and fear traveled faster than the fog. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the empire, that history's most elusive ghost emerged. Between August and November, 5 women later known as the Canonical Five were brutally murdered under the cover of darkness. Each killing was swift, violent, and disturbingly precise, suggesting a hand guided by knowledge rather than chaos. The killer didn't simply vanish into the night. He seemed to revel in the terror he created, taunting police and newspapers with chilling letters signed in blood-red ink. From those messages, a name was born: Jack the Ripper. Despite the largest manhunt Victorian London had ever seen, the murderer was never caught. Files grew cold, witnesses faded into history, and suspects slipped through the cracks of time. Yet the question refused to die: who was Jack the Ripper? Today, we return to the original police records, witness statements, and forensic clues to examine the 5 men investigators believe were closest to unmasking the killer and why the truth may still be hiding in plain sight. At number 5, we have Montague John Druitt. On the surface, he embodied the ideal Victorian gentleman and Oxford graduate, a barrister, and a respected schoolteacher. Intelligent, well-connected, and outwardly respectable, Druitt seemed an unlikely candidate for one of history's most notorious killers. So why did his name rise to the top of police suspicion? The circumstances: in November of 1888, following the final and most horrific murder, that of Mary Jane Kelly inside her miller's courtroom, the killings stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The Whitechapel terror was over. Just weeks later, Druitt's body was recovered from the River Thames. He had taken his own life by drowning, his pockets weighted with stones. To investigators at the time, the timing felt more than coincidental. The evidence: Sir Melville Macnaghten, Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, later recorded in his private memoranda that Druitt was his prime suspect. Macnaghten claimed Druitt had shown signs of sexual insanity and suggested that members of Druitt's own family feared he was the murderer. These notes, never meant for public release, would later become one of the strongest pieces of circumstantial evidence linking Druitt to the Ripper. The flaw: yet the case against him is far from airtight. Modern historians point out that Druitt appears to have been playing in a cricket match in another city on the day of one of the murders, casting serious doubt on his involvement. There is also no direct physical evidence tying him to any of the crime scenes. Was Druitt a troubled man whose suicide conveniently aligned with the end of the killings, or was he used as a convenient scapegoat by a police force under immense pressure to explain the terror? His story leaves us with more questions than answers, setting the tone for a mystery where respectability, madness, and coincidence blur into something far more unsettling. Number 4 takes us across the Atlantic: Dr. Francis Tumblety. The profile Tumblety was an American doctor, though his medical credentials were dubious at best. He built a fortune selling herbal remedies and tonics, presenting himself as a man of science, but those who knew him described him as eccentric, flamboyant, and deeply misogynistic. He wore a dramatic, waxed mustache and cultivated an air of self-importance, making him a conspicuous figure in Victorian London society. Beneath that veneer, however, lurked a disturbing obsession with women. The chilling clue: even by the standards of the era, Tumblety's behavior was macabre. He reportedly collected human uteri preserved in jars, which he would shockingly display at dinner parties. Given that Jack the Ripper notoriously mutilated his female victims, removing organs with surgical precision, this detail is horrifyingly relevant. For detectives piecing together the killings, it painted a portrait of someone who was not just cruel, but methodically fascinated with female anatomy. The escaped Tumblety was in London at the time of the murders and even came under police scrutiny, being arrested on charges of gross indecency. But after posting bail, he vanished, fleeing first to France and eventually back to New York. Scotland Yard detectives pursued him across the ocean, but legal and bureaucratic barriers prevented any formal extradition. He slipped through their fingers, leaving behind only suspicion and speculation. The profile fit to modern criminologists. Tumblety checks many boxes of a mobile, high-functioning sociopath. Wealthy enough to move freely, intelligent enough to evade capture, and cruel enough to commit the gruesome acts without remorse. He embodies the type of predator who could have walked the foggy streets of Whitechapel without ever being caught. His story is a chilling reminder that sometimes, the Ripper may have had the perfect cover, a man who seemed harmless, even impressive, by society's standards, while hiding something far darker beneath the surface. Number 3 is a name that shocked the art world: Walter Sickert. The theory: Walter Sickert was a celebrated British painter, known for his striking depictions of everyday life. But in recent decades, he became one of the most controversial suspects in the Jack the Ripper case. This theory was brought to mainstream attention by best-selling author Patricia Cornwell, who spent millions acquiring Sickert's paintings, personal effects, and even his desk, searching for any DNA evidence that could link him to the murders. Her work sparked intense debate and fascination, blurring the line between art history and criminal investigation. The clues in art: Sickert's fixation on the macabre is evident in his work. His series of paintings called The Camden Town Murders depict scenes of shadowed rooms, vulnerable women, and quiet violence. Some theorists argue that the composition and mood of these works echo the brutal murders in Whitechapel, almost as if Sickert was replaying the crimes on canvas. Critics counter that he was simply exploring the darker sides of human experience as an artist, but the eerie parallels are difficult to ignore. The forensic link: Cornwell also points to mitochondrial DNA allegedly found on the stamps of letters attributed to Jack the Ripper, which she claims matched DNA discovered on Sickert's stationery. However, skeptics argue that the majority of the so-called Ripper letters were likely hoaxes written by journalists seeking to sensationalize the murders. This raises the possibility that Sickert was either a clever prankster capitalizing on the hysteria, or a man obsessed with the dark fantasies that haunted his artistic imagination. The psychological angle: beyond physical evidence, some criminologists find Sickert's personality intriguing. He was socially withdrawn, had a fascination with death, and often depicted women in moments of vulnerability. Could these traits reflect the mind of a man capable of murder? Or were they merely the hallmarks of a brooding artist, exploring the grim realities of Victorian London? Whether Sickert was a killer or simply a man whose art mirrored the horrors around him, his story reminds us that obsession and creativity can sometimes be dangerously intertwined, especially in a city already gripped by fear. Number 2 is a man whose name didn't enter the Ripper conversation until the 1990s: James Maybrick. The Diary, in 1992, a startling discovery shook the world of Ripperology. A 63-page diary, allegedly penned by James Maybrick, a wealthy cotton merchant from Liverpool. In its pages, the writer confesses in chilling detail to the Whitechapel murders, describing the killings with disturbing precision. The diary closes with the signature that sent shockwaves through historians and enthusiasts alike: "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." If authentic, it would represent the first definitive confession from the elusive killer. The motive: Maybrick's personal life lends a dark plausibility to the claim. He was known to be a heavy user of arsenic and strychnine, substances that were sometimes prescribed as medicine at the time but could induce paranoia, rage, and erratic behavior. He also had a tumultuous marriage. Rumors of his wife Florence's infidelity abound. Some theorists suggest that a combination of drug-fueled anger and personal betrayal could have unleashed a violent and calculating spree, fitting the profile of the Ripper's crimes. The controversy: yet the diary is far from universally accepted. Scientific analysis of the ink has produced inconclusive results, leaving scholars divided. Skeptics argue that it may be an elaborate forgery, crafted to capitalize on the enduring fascination with the Ripper murders. Proponents, however, point to curious artifacts, such as Maybrick's pocket watch, reportedly inscribed with the initials of the Ripper victims, a detail too precise to dismiss lightly. If genuine, the diary solves one of history's greatest mysteries. If not, it may be the most ingenious literary hoax ever perpetrated, demonstrating just how the legend of Jack the Ripper continues to captivate imaginations even a century later. The legacy: whether truth or fabrication, Maybrick's story highlights the enduring allure of the Ripper case, a blend of scandal, murder, and tantalizing possibility that keeps researchers, historians, and amateur sleuths hunting for answers more than 100 years after the fact. Finally, the man many experts believe is the definitive Jack the Ripper, Aaron Kosminski. Who was he? Aaron Kosminski was a 23-year-old Polish Jewish immigrant living and working as a barber in Whitechapel, the very heart of the murder zone. He was poor, socially isolated, and struggling to survive in the same maze of alleys where the Ripper stalked his victims. And like many other suspects, Kosminski didn't need to travel far. The killings unfolded quite literally outside his door. The police view. At the time, senior police officials quietly zeroed in on Kosminski. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson wrote in the margins of a police report that Kosminski had been positively identified by a witness, but that witness refused to testify in court, likely out of fear or due to cultural and community pressures. Police records describe Kosminski as having a great hatred of women, particularly prostitutes, and suffering from severe mental illness accompanied by strong homicidal tendencies. This was not idle speculation. Officers believed they knew who the killer was but lacked the legal means to prove it. The smoking gun. In 2014, the case seemed closer to resolution than ever before. A shawl believed to have been recovered from the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder was analyzed using modern DNA techniques. Researchers claim the fabric contained genetic material matching both Eddowes and a living descendant of Kosminski. For many, this was the long-awaited breakthrough, a forensic link connecting a known suspect directly to a victim. The verdict. Critics argue that the shawl's provenance is uncertain and that contamination over more than a century makes the DNA evidence unreliable. Yet even without it, Kosminski stands apart from the other suspects. He lived in the epicenter of the crimes, matched eyewitness descriptions, exhibited documented violent misogyny, and suffered from untreated psychosis. In 1891, he was committed to an insane asylum. After that, the murders stopped forever, and like wealthy gentlemen, eccentric artists, or transatlantic suspects, Aaron Kosminski required no elaborate theories. He fits the crime geographically, psychologically, and historically. While absolute proof may remain elusive, to many investigators and historians, Kosminski is not just the most compelling suspect, he is the most human explanation for a monster born of poverty, madness, and a city that looked the other way. Whether it was a royal prince hiding behind privilege, a mad doctor drifting between continents, a tormented artist obsessed with darkness, or a local barber lost to madness, Jack the Ripper remains the ultimate shadow in the annals of crime. He slipped through gaslit streets and vanished into history, escaping the gallows and taking his true identity to the grave. What remains are fragments, blood-stained records, whispered testimonies, and clues that refuse to fully align. More than a century later, the question still haunts us. Was the DNA evidence against Aaron Kosminski enough to finally close the case, or is it just another piece of a puzzle corrupted by time? Did the police come closer to the truth than they ever admitted, or was the real killer someone whose name was never written down, never suspected, and lost forever among the forgotten poor of Victorian London? Perhaps that is why this case endures. Jack the Ripper is not just a murderer. He is a mirror reflecting fear, injustice, and the limits of justice itself. As long as there are unanswered questions, the legend lives on, walking those same fog-covered streets, just out of reach. Now we want to hear from you. Who do you think Jack the Ripper really was? Share your theory in the comments below, and let's keep the discussion alive. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's darkest mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more true crime stories, new updates, and unsolved cases that refuse to stay buried. Until next time, keep questioning the shadows.